Hi, this is chapter 24, the digestive system infections for microbiology. It's a really long one, so let's get started. We're going to start off with the digestive system anatomy. The digestive system, otherwise known as the gastrointestinal tract, gastro refers to stomach, intestines, and it is a tract, so it's open at two ends. It's basically just a long tube that runs through our body. Our mouth is open at one end, and then the anus is the opening at the other end. And all the way through the gastrointestinal tract, we have mucous membrane, which provides some protection against microbes in the outside world. The digestive tract is thought to be exposed to the outside environment because of the openings that we have here. Anything taken in orally can go through any part of our digestive system all the way out. Because of that, it's really there's a plentiful and various flora in our digestive tract. The normal flora contains everything. It contains those single-celled organisms from the domain bacteria. I'm sorry, archaea, which is similar to bacteria in that they're prokaryotes, but they're very different in terms of their metabolism. We have our normal eubacteria. We have fungi, protists, and viruses is all part of our normal digestive tract. It is important to have this normal flora because it does help us in ways such as, making some substances that we need, like vitamins. It also informs our immune system. They did an experiment with some mice where they grew them up in a sterile environment and their immune system was not fully properly developed. So it's required. It also helps digest some, nutrients that we can't digest ourselves. In terms of the accessory organs, these are organs that secrete their substances into the tract to help with food breakdown. We talked about the salivary glands in our sort of innate defenses. We have three of them. There's the parotid gland, which is going to be here by the base of your ear. Then we have a sublingual under the tongue, and we have submandibular that's nested in our mandible. So all three of these are going to secrete their saliva into the mouth and help break down the foods with some enzymes that saliva has. And also it contains lots of antimicrobial molecules, as you learned in the innate immune system. For the liver and gallbladder, they are here, right? So the liver is going to predominantly, for digestion anyways, it's going to make bile. So bile is made here in the liver. And then the bile, excess bile is going to go to the gallbladder, which is a little holding tank for the bile, and it concentrates it and it holds it until it's required to be secreted into the tract. And then our last accessory organ is the pancreas. The pancreas is located sort of underneath the stomach, and it also secretes enzymes that help break down food into this first part of the small intestine. So when food comes in, it's, microbes and our food, are coming in. Our food is not sterile. So it's going to be first, the microbes can be broken down or inhibited by the substances in our saliva. As it comes down our esophagus to the stomach, we know that the stomach has a very acidic pH around 2 that can destroy a lot of bacterial cells and enzyme and viruses and such. And then from here, we move on to the small intestine. So this first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. Then the second part's jejunum and ileum. So these are all small intestine portions. And in the small intestine, we do have normal flora, but not as much as the large intestine or the colon. So the large intestine is this mass. It's large for its diameter that is going to move slower than the small intestine. So that's why it harbors more flora, because the small intestine is actively pushing and moving the digested food out. But then here in the large intestine, we're kind of slowed down to extract water, electrolytes, and to compact the food into feces. So this large intestine has a lot of normal flora. And the interesting thing about the normal flora that we have in our gastrointestinal tract, mouth and intestines, is that it's varied between people. It's also varied between where you live, and you can have transient flora, you can have your resident flora. So they're looking a lot right now. There's a lot of research going into looking at your normal microbiota especially in the GI tract, and looking at how it affects different things such as, nutrient absorption, even mental illness, and, different kinds of diseases or disorders that you wouldn't think would be linked to their normal flora. It's very interesting. Okay, so here in the mouth, right, we're just going over this again. We're going to begin digestion by mechanical breaking up the food. So mechanical digestion is just chewing. We have some chemicals digesting the fats and the starches in our saliva. And then this saliva, helps us mix those microbes around. And it also helps to, when you spit or cough or sneeze, right, those microbes are spit out. And that can cause infection, obviously, to other people. But you can also swallow them into the stomach, where a lot of them will be destroyed. All right, so the accessory organs here, this is another mention of our enzyme lysozyme that can destroy peptidoglycan. In terms of the tooth, for those of you who, I think most of you haven't had anatomy, but we'll go over this again. The enamel is the hardest substance in the body. This is true. The enamel is going to coat all of the exposed tooth, and the enamel is basically present when you get your adult teeth as a child, and then it's there and it's not replaced. So when your enamel starts to erode or dissolve due to acids, the loss does not come back. Underneath the enamel, there's a substance called dentin, and this is actually very porous. So it has lots of pores, tiny, tiny pores, and it leads to this inner part of the tooth, which is the pulp. And the pulp contains your blood vessels and nerves. So if your tooth starts to hurt, that means that some kind of irritant is getting through the enamel, through the dentin, and into the pulp. So usually the enamel starts to erode. And if you have sensitive teeth, sensitive to like sugars or temperature changes, that's because the enamel's thin, the irritant can get through those tiny pores of the dentin and then irritate that nervous tissue there. The gingiva is what we call the gums, right? So the gums meet the tooth. There's a small crevice there, and that's where, you have tartar buildup. That's a nice little nook where bacteria can hold on to. The tooth is attached to your bone by a ligament and a substance called cementum. So this is actually organic. And if you have tooth decay that gets into, if you have your gums that are receding and you have a passageway into here between the tooth and the bone, this area here can start to become infected, inflamed, and that can also cause this cementum to degenerate, and tooth loss can occur from severe periodontal disease because you have that infection coming here. Also, because we have this blood supply coming into the tooth, if you do have infectious agents in the mouth that get into this pulp region, they do have access to the bloodstream, and so they can become systemic. So that's very dangerous as well. One thing down here, bacteria and archaea are abundant in the mouth, and they coat all the surfaces, all the nooks and crannies. And in the mouth, there's tiny, tiny microenvironments. So there can be anaerobic spaces, there can be those microaerophilic spaces, there can be spaces that are like constantly exposed to oxygen. So because of that difference, you can have different kinds of bacteria growing in those different microenvironments. So signs of tooth decay. We're going to the biofilm. So the first thing that's going to build up in your mouth, even like overnight, right? If you forget to brush your teeth, or even if you do brush your teeth, you wake up with not the freshest breath, because overnight you're going to have the bacteria in your mouth forming a biofilm, which is also called a plaque. And that it is able to erode the enamel. So that's the first step, right? You have these biofilms developing on the teeth, and they can actually gradually dissolve the enamel. And then once they get through the enamel, then they can start working on the dentin, right? So we see the dentin affected here and plaques building up here. So this is what flossing is meant to get rid of. Flossing is meant to get rid of all these side, hard to reach areas for the toothbrush, but striking these areas between the tooth and the gum. So if left untreated, the lesion can reach the pulp and cause an abscess. An abscess is going to be infectious sac of pus and microbes. And that proximity to the bone, right? You can loosen that tooth and you can lose the tooth to the attachment to the bone. And like I said before, if your bacteria reach the bloodstream, they can cause focal infections or sepsis. So this is the blood infection, and then focal infections might be something like the bacteria from your mouth travel to the liver and they cause an infection in the liver. So it's a secondary site of infection. The one bacteria you want to remember is Streptococcus mutans, which is the majority of cavities or caries are caused by the Streptococcus mutans, basically starting it. So this is our picture. You have this also in your lab review for this lab that we did on the Snyder test. So number one, right, here's our Streptococcus mutans responsible for this biofilm creation, right? So that's the first step, leads to tartar. Tartar is just that yellow built up biofilm. So we have our early colonizers here. Then we have, things that might lead to more bacterial growth. So maybe you're not brushing your teeth, maybe you have a very high sugar diet, and maybe, there's also conditions where you don't produce enough saliva, and that's very bad for your teeth because saliva has a really big job in like diluting the bacteria in your mouth and then swallowing the bacteria in your mouth or spitting it out so that it doesn't get to those high levels. So you can see here that here's our Streptococcus mutans, right? And it's going to build that robust biofilm. It's an acid-tolerant, acid-producing bacteria. And one thing you want to know about your enamel is that the enamel is great. It's very resistant to a lot of substances, but it has its weakness, right? Its kryptonite is basically acid. So acid really, it dissolves the enamel. And when you have a bacteria that produces acid, that's going to, drive that cavity. And then you have these late colonizers of this biofilm, which is be your lactobacillus, which is right here. So Streptococcus mutans basically turbocharges the biofilm, and then you have lactobacillus that is also an acid-producing bacteria, and that acid's going to erode the enamel. So why is sugar bad for your teeth? Because it's not the sugar itself, but it's that the bacteria here, the Strep mutans or these other bacteria, they ferment the sugar that's in your diet. They ferment the sugar in your mouth. And then when, as a byproduct fermentation, as we all know, acids are produced by that fermentation. So you're basically, when you eat candy, you're giving the bacteria in your mouth food to create acids with. So you want to make sure that if you do have poor teeth, to watch the sugar and to have like sugar-free gum instead of like a regular sugar gum. Here, fluoride is used to harden the enamel. So when fluoride is used, the metals here, calcium, phosphate, the things that will help build the enamel, fluoride is going to strengthen that. Fluoride also inhibits metabolism of the bacteria. This is a picture of just sugar-free gums. So sugar-free gum can increase saliva flow. That's, what you chew gum to sort of rinse your mouth after a meal or have better breath, but it really helps to draw the saliva out, and you're increasing the dilution and the washing of the teeth with that, and the sugar-free gums help with that. So that's what we can talk about there. These are some images of your tartar, which is called a dental calculus, and not very pretty from this vantage point. So you can see how tartar builds up in those, basically the connection between the tooth and the gum in those crevices. So here's a small carie or decay right at a small cavity. You can see it show up in an x-ray. So you have a normal tooth here that's very white and very dense. And then you start to see the black or the gray area. That's going to be an area picked up by an x-ray that's going to be less dense. So it's going to be a hole or some kind of soft area where like the bacteria has gone into and started to erode it. And then here's some other pictures of just teeth being damaged. All right, so gingivitis and periodontitis is a gum infection. So healthy gums are going to hold the teeth firmly and they don't bleed, right? So if you brush your teeth and you see blood, or if you're flossing and you see blood, you do have some sign of gingivitis. So gingivitis is where the gums become inflamed and irritated, occasional bleeding. And then as if you don't address the gingivitis, it can lead to periodontitis. So periodontitis is going to be chronic inflammation and erosion of your gums. They're going to recede, so they're going to expose more of the neck of the tooth. They're going to expose an area that might not be sufficiently covered by enamel, and you can see that we can really get destruction of the tooth in these areas. In advanced periodontitis, the infection can spread to those ligaments that hold the teeth to the bone, and then you can lose your teeth. So this is an image of gingivitis, where you can see that there is an extra red area next to the tartar, right, and on the teeth, very, very red here. And then this is going to be an image of that chronic periodontitis, where you see the teeth, it's very, very red around the gums, and the gums are also sort of receding away from the tooth. So the newly exposed area, when your gums do recede, they are relatively unprotected, and the bacteria can really get in there and cause more infection. Prevention of tooth decay, I mentioned this already with fluoride. So our enamel is made with something called hydroxyapatite. It can demineralize, and you also see that this karyogenic bacteria, this is the bacteria that causes tooth decay, like we talked about, Streptococcus mutans and Lactobacillus. The acids can really attack that enamel. So what fluoride does is it makes the enamel more hard. So you see how the fluoride is incorporated into the hydroxyapatite, and it acts to resist that erosion. So tooth brushing and flossing, obviously it's a physical removal of the biofilm and bacteria. Then we have fluoride that's found in toothpaste and also municipal water. That's going to make our stronger enamel. Fluoride is also bacteriostatic, which slows down the growth of bacteria and then subsequently the enamel degradation. All right, we talked about the sugars, right? Reducing sugars is good as well. And then now here's some other oral infections. So this is going to be a herpes virus that we talked about before with cold sores, but it can actually get into your mouth, and it can cause something called herpetic gingivostomatitis. So it's basically the roof of your mouth here and the gums. And so you have ulcers on the mucous membranes in the mouth. So basically it's this sort of eruption, but it's inside the throat. It's normally self-limiting, and it's very common in the immunocompromised. So it's a very severe reaction to this. A normal person might only be having cold sore every once in a while, but then someone who's immunocompromised might have it lead to this more severe infection. Thrush is candidiasis in the mouth. So we already talked about Candida in terms of, vaginosis, but we can also have Candida overgrow in the mouth, which is called thrush. And you can see here the yeast really growing in patches on the tongue and on the mucous membranes of the mouth. This condition, thrush, is not something you see in healthy adults. It's something you see in immunocompromised patients, especially AIDS patients, those with a decimated immune system. And you can have infants commonly have thrush because they have an underdeveloped immune system, and they have, they don't have their normal flora established yet, which helps a lot by balancing the microbes in the mouth. All right, mumps. The mumps is caused by a mumps virus, and this is a infection of the parotid gland. So remember, that was the really large salivary gland that was by the ear, but it is really swollen, right? So mumps has really attacked that parotid gland and caused a lot of swelling. Mumps is basically transmitted through respiratory droplets or contaminated saliva. It's very contagious. It used to be, just a regular childhood disease, but since the MMR vaccine, right, the MMR vaccine is measles, mumps, and rubella, mumps becomes a rare condition to see. You can see here that the infection, it can be subclinical, so no symptoms at all to very complicated symptoms, such as if the virus were to reach your brain, your spinal cord. It can also cause deafness because of the proximity to the ear. It can infect the ear. Okay, so this is a wrap up of our oral infections. So we talked about Streptococcus mutans. We don't really need to talk about this, but we know Streptococcus mutans, and we talked about lactobacillus, right? So we need to put lactobacillus there too. Herpetic gingivostomatitis and mumps and thrush. And we did not talk about trench mouth. So that's just kind of a very intense form of periodontitis, ulcerative gingivitis, so ulcers form. And that's going to wrap up our first part.